Do you hear it? The echoes of the past, the whispers of forgotten truths, fragments of memories lost in the shadows. Welcome to BRAINROT, Echoes, where we bring you stories long buried, unravel mysteries cloaked by time, and guide you through the darkest corners of the mind and the universe. Each video is more than just content. It's an echo resonating deep within, urging you to question, to wonder, to explore. Backend index pointing right, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us in listening to the echoes the world tried to silence. You're telling me humans don't even have proper shielding on their vessels, Admiral Krathel? His compound eyes widened as the display showed Earth's pathetic excuse for a space navy. Those tin cans wouldn't survive 10 seconds against a Dravari scout ship. Lieutenant Dexmore, intelligence officer of the Galactic Hegemony's 8th Conquest Fleet, flicked his antennae in confirmation. Yes, Admiral. Their most advanced warship, the UNS Indomitable, has hull plating that wouldn't stop a civilian laser mining drill. And their weapon systems, primitive chemical propellants, and nuclear warheads. No phase cannons, no quantum torpedoes, not even basic graviton beams. The bridge of the Hegemony's flagship, Inevitable Dominance, erupted in chittering laughter. Admiral Krathel's mandibles clicked rapidly in amusement, the Xeno equivalent of slapping his knees. And they call themselves a spacefaring species? Barely out of their gravity, well, and already thinking they can stand among the stars. The Admiral's compound eyes gleamed with predatory anticipation. This conquest will be the easiest in my 300 cycles of service. Lieutenant Dexmore hesitated, his claw hovering over the holographic controls. There is one peculiarity about these humans, Admiral. Krathel's mandibles stilled. They've been broadcasting their presence into space for over 2 centuries now, actively trying to contact alien life. The bridge crew exchanged confused glances, their exoskeletons clicking softly as they shifted in their command pods. What kind of species advertises their location to potential predators? Asked Commander Vexer, tactical and second-in-command. Admiral Krathel waved a dismissive claw. A foolish one. Or perhaps they're so primitive they don't understand the concept of conquest. Either way, their world is resource-rich and strategically positioned. The hegemony has marked it and claimed it. We shall take it. He rose from his command pod, towering 9 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the bridge lights. Prepare the invasion fleet. We'll establish orbit around their home world and demand unconditional surrender. If they resist, which these primitives inevitably will, we'll deploy the standard protocol. Tactical strikes on their largest population centers until they submit. Yes, Admiral, the bridge crew responded in unison. As the massive hegemony armada accelerated toward the Sol system, Admiral Krathel allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another conquest for his record. Another primitive species to serve the greater glory of the hegemony. This humanity would soon learn their place in the grand scheme of the universe, at the bottom of the galactic food chain. Little did he know, humans had a peculiar talent for defying expectations. Captain James Reeves of the United Nations Space Command stared at the long-range sensor data with an expression that could only be described as profoundly unimpressed. So let me get this straight, he said, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. An alien armada of 117 warships is heading straight for Earth, and they're not even trying to hide it. Lieutenant Commander Alex Reed nodded, his fingers jumping across the holographic display. Yes, sir. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, too. Our linguistics team is working on the translation, but the general message seems to be surrender or die. Pretty standard stuff, actually. Standard? Reeves raised an eyebrow. Well, if you've read any science fiction from the last 300 years, yeah. Reed shrugged. Apparently, reality has a limited imagination. Reeves snorted. And what's their ETA? At current velocity, they'll reach Earth orbit in 72 hours. The captain nodded thoughtfully, then activated his comm unit. Reeves to Admiral Wilson. A gruff voice answered almost immediately. Wilson here. I'm assuming this is about our uninvited guests. Yes, sir. Request permission to execute protocol Trojan Horse. There was a brief pause on the line. Are you sure that's necessary, Captain? These folks might just be dropping by to say hello. Reed coughed to hide a laugh. They're broadcasting surrender demands in advance, Admiral, Reeves replied dryly. I don't think they're coming for a diplomatic brunch. Fair point. Permission granted. I'll inform the Security Council. Wilson out. Reeves turned to his XO with a grin that would make a shark reconsider its life choices. Well, Commander Reed, looks like we're about to give our new friends a proper human welcome. Reed's answering smile was equally predatory. Should I feel sorry for them, sir? Ask me again in 72 hours. The Hegemony Invasion Fleet dropped out of FTL on the edge of the Sol system, their massive ships casting long shadows across the void. Admiral Crathel stood before the main viewport, admiring the blue-white gem of Earth in the distance. Status report, he commanded. Lieutenant Dexmore consulted his console. Scans confirm minimal defensive capabilities, Admiral. They have a small number of orbital platforms, likely weapon systems, and a handful of those primitive warships we observed. They appear to be marshaling their fleet near their moon. A futile gesture, Commander Vexer commented. They must recognize the futility of resistance. And yet they resist anyway, Crathel mused. Fascinating, in a primitive sort of way, like watching prey species fight back against their natural predators. He turned to his communications officer. Broadcast our demands again. Full surrender, immediate disarmament, and preparation for integration into the hegemony. Give them 6 hours to comply before we begin targeting their population centers. Yes, Admiral. As a message turned toward Earth, Crathel settled back into his command pod. 6 hours was generous by hegemony standards. Most species were given merely one, but he was curious about these humans. Their pitiful technology suggested a backward civilization. Yet something about their behavior interested him. What kind of species would face certain defeat, yet prepare to fight anyway? Perhaps they would make interesting slaves after all. In the White House Situation Room, the United Nations Security Council had convened an emergency session via holographic conference. The room buzzed with tension as military officers, diplomats, and intelligence analysts reviewed the latest data on the alien armada. President Elizabeth Morrison sat at the head of the table, her expression stern but composed. So, Admiral Wilson, you're telling me that Captain Reeves wants to implement protocol Trojan Horse? Admiral Wilson, a tall, imposing figure with dark skin and silver hair, nodded. Yes, Madam President, and I've given my approval. Care to explain to our international colleagues what exactly that entails? She asked, gesturing to the holographic representatives of various world powers. Wilson tapped a command into the table's surface, bringing up a detailed tactical display. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 70 years, humanity has maintained 2 separate space programs. The public one, consisting of our visible fleet, the lunar and Mars colonies, and our mining operations in the asteroid belt, was designed to appear deliberately underwhelming. The Russian president leaned forward, his holographic form flickering slightly. You mean we've been sandbagging? Wilson's lips twitched. That's one way to put it, sir. Yes. Since the Great Reform of 2078, when the major powers agreed to unified space exploration, we've been operating under the sheep in wolf's clothing doctrine, or rather its inverse. Wolf in sheep's clothing. Precisely. The Chinese premier corrected with a faint smile. Our visible fleet was designed to look functional but relatively primitive. Basic weapon systems, limited FTL capabilities, modest defenses, the kind of technology you'd expect from a young spacefaring species. The British Prime Minister's hologram adjusted her glasses. And the second space program? In response, Wilson expanded the tactical display to show the dark side of the moon and the space beyond Neptune. Red dots began to appear, dozens of them, then hundreds. This, he said simply, is humanity's real fleet. Even President Morrison looked shocked. My God, Wilson, how many ships are we talking about? 375 warships of various classes, ma'am, plus support vessels, carriers, and automated defense platforms. All equipped with our actual level of technology, not the watered-down version we've been parading around the solar system. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "You're telling me," the French president finally said, "that we've been maintaining a shadow fleet more than 20 times the size of our public one? How did you keep this secret?" Admiral Wilson shrugged. "The same way governments have always kept secrets. Need-to-know basis, compartmentalized information, and a healthy budget for black ops. The shipyards are mainly located in the Kuiper Belt, with additional facilities in the asteroid belt disguised as mining operations." "And the crews?" asked the Japanese Prime Minister. "Officially assigned to deep space research missions, extended tours on Mars, or classified projects. In reality, they've been training and serving on our actual fleet." President Morrison rubbed her temples. "So what exactly is Protocol Trojan Horse?" Admiral Wilson's expression turned grim. "It's quite simple, Madam President. We let them come to us, believing we're defenseless. We put up just enough of a fight with our public fleet to seem legitimate. And when they're committed to their attack," he made a closing gesture with his fist, "we spring the trap." Admiral Krathel watched with growing irritation as the deadline for Earth surrender came and went without response. "They're ignoring us," he growled, mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. Commander Vexer appeared, offering a data pad. "Not exactly, Admiral. They've responded to this message." Krathel took the pad, his eyes scanning the translated text, to the commander of the approaching alien fleet. "The nations of Earth have received your communication and considered your demands. Our response is as follows. Earth and humanity will never surrender to threats of violence. We stand ready to defend our home world. However, we are also prepared to establish peaceful diplomatic relations if you reconsider your hostile approach. The choice is yours." For a moment, the bridge was silent. Then Krathel began to laugh, a harsh, chittering sound that made his subordinates step back instinctively. The audacity, the sheer primitive audacity. He tossed the pad back to Vexer. They thought they could negotiate with the hegemony with ships that couldn't survive a meteor shower? He turned to his tactical officer. "Target their largest population center. I believe it's called Tokyo, and prepare to fire a demonstration shot. Let's see how quickly their tone changes when a few million of their species are vaporized." "Sir," Dexmore interrupted defensively. "Their fleet is moving to intercept. 27 vessels arranging themselves in a defensive formation between us and their planet." Krathel's compound eyes gleamed with excellent anticipation. "They wish to die with honor. We shall grant them that small dignity. Battle stations. Prepare to engage the human fleet." The massive hegemony warships surged forward, weapon systems powering up as they closed the distance to Earth. On the view screen, the tiny human vessels looked like insects compared to the hegemony's mighty warships. "This won't even qualify as a battle," Vexer observed with disdain. "More like pest control." Krathel settled into his command pod, mandibles clicking in amusement. "Begin the conquest." Aboard the UNS Indomitable, Captain Reeves watched the approaching alien armada with calculated calm. "They're taking the bait," he noted as the enemy fleet accelerated toward their position. "All ships maintain formation. Remember, we need to make this look good, but not too good." Acknowledgements came in from the captains of the other vessels in Earth's last line of defense. "Weapon status?" Reeves asked. Lieutenant Commander Reed checked his console. "All weapons online, operating at public capability levels, which is to say embarrassingly underpowered." "Perfect," Reeves grinned. "Shield status?" "Shields at pathetically inadequate levels, sir. Just as planned." "Excellent." The captain leaned back in his chair, surprisingly relaxed for a man about to face an overwhelming alien armada. "And our real-time feed to the Shadow Fleet?" "Transmitting on all channels, sir. They're seeing everything we see." Reeves nodded with satisfaction. "Then let's put on a show, shall we? Fire a warning shot. Make it look like we're trying our best." The Indomitable shuddered slightly as it launched a primitive nuclear missile towards the approaching aliens. "Now we wait," Reeves said softly. And pray these bugs have never heard of the Trojan horse. Admiral Crathul could barely contain his disdain as he watched the human missile approach. "They're firing nuclear weapons at us," he said incredulously. "Actual fission-based explosives. I haven't seen those used in warfare since my great-grandfather's time." "Shall I intercept, Admiral?" asked the weapons officer. Crathul waved a dismissive claw. "Don't bother. Let hit our shields. I want them to see how futile their resistance truly is." The missile struck the forward shields of the inevitable dominants, creating a brief flare of light that quickly dissipated. "Shield status?" Crathul asked, already knowing the answer. "Shields at 99.98%, Admiral." The impact was barely registered. The Admiral rose from his command pod, mandibles spread wide in what passed for a smile among his species. "Target their lead vessel and fire a single shot from our tertiary weapons array. Let's show them the difference between their technology and ours." A beam of concentrated energy lanced out from the Hegemony flagship, striking the Indomitable directly. The human vessel rocked violently, atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches. "Minimal damage to their ship," reported the tactical officer, sounding almost shocked. "Their hull integrity is compromised, but they remain operational." As expected, Crathul clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "They're more durable than they look. No matter. Proceed with the attack pattern. Destroy their fleet, then move into orbit for planetary bombardment." The Hegemony fleet spread out into an attack formation, weapons charging as they closed the distance to Earth's defensive line. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, shouted the damage control officer as the Indomitable rocked from the alien weapon impact. "Emergency force fields holding, but just barely." Captain Reeves gripped the arms of his command chair, playing his part convincingly. "Return fire. All ships engage at will." Earth's small fleet began firing a barrage of missiles and energy weapons, most of which dissipated harmlessly against the Hegemony shields. "We're barely scratching them, sir," Reed reported grimly. "I know," Reeves replied through gritted teeth. "Just keep firing. We need to hold their attention for another 3 minutes." The alien fleet continued its advance, their massive ships dwarfing the human vessels. Beams of energy sliced through space, cutting into Earth's defenders with surgical precision. "UNS Defiant reports critical damage," the communications officer announced. "They're abandoning ship. UNS Resolute has lost engines and weapons. They're dead in the water. UNS Valiant destroyed, sir. No survivors detected." The reports continued as one by one, Earth's visible defense fleet was decimated by the overwhelming alien force. Captain Reeves listened to each with a stoic expression, occasionally giving orders to fire back or adjusting their position, but never showing panic. Reed leaned close to his captain. "Sir, we've passed the 3-minute mark." Reeves allowed himself a small, predatory smile. "About damn time. Signal the fleet." Reed tapped a sequence into his console. Not the standard communications array, but a hidden quantum transmitter. The message was simple, a single word. "Checkmate." Admiral Crathul was beginning to feel almost bored as his fleet methodically dismantled the human defenses. Their ships were falling one after another, offering pathetic resistance against the Hegemony's superior technology. "This is almost disappointing," he commented to Commander Vexer. "I expected at least some challenge." Perhaps their bravado was just that, Admiral. Empty words. Perhaps. "Still, Admiral." Lieutenant Dexmore's urgent voice cut through the conversation. "Sensors are detecting spatial distortions at multiple points around our fleet." Crathul's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Spatial distortions? What kind?" "Unknown, sir, but they're massive and growing. Energy signatures unlike anything in our database." Before the Admiral could respond, the space around the Hegemony fleet rippled like water disturbed by a thrown stone. The very fabric of reality seemed to bulge and flex. And then, with a flash of blinding light, ships began to appear. Not one or two, but hundreds, then more. Emerging from what appeared to be folded space itself, A vast armada of vessels materialized, surrounding the hegemony fleet in a three-dimensional sphere of overwhelming firepower. These were not the primitive tin cans they had been fighting. These ships were sleek, advanced, and unmistakably built for war. They gleamed with a dark metallic luster that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their designs were angular and predatory, like oceanic hunters evolved for the void of space. And there were thousands of them. Impossible, Crathel whispered, his compound eyes wide with shock. This can't be. Admiral Dexmore's voice shook slightly. We're being hailed by the largest vessel in their fleet. Crathel stared at the tactical display, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The hegemony fleet, his mighty invasion force that had conquered 17 worlds, was now completely surrounded, outnumbered more than 20-1. Put it through, he managed, mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. The main view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. Not the face of Captain Reeves from the ship they'd nearly destroyed, but an older human with dark skin and silver hair, wearing an immaculate uniform adorned with numerous insignia of rank. This is Admiral Thomas Wilson of the Earth Defense Force Shadow Fleet, the human announced, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. I believe you were expecting us to surrender? Admiral Wilson's face remained impassive as he faced the alien commander on his view screen. The insectoid creature seemed to be in a state of shock, its mandibles clicking rapidly in what Wilson's xenobiology experts had identified as an expression of extreme stress. This is impossible, the alien finally managed. Our intelligence indicates your species possessed only primitive space technology. Wilson allowed himself a small smile. Yes, that was rather the point, Admiral Crathel. The alien responded automatically, still clearly struggling to process the situation. Admiral Crathel, I must commend your intelligence services. They found exactly what we wanted them to find. Wilson leaned forward slightly. You see, humanity has been aware of the wider galactic community for quite some time. We've observed how the hegemony treats primitive species, so we made a strategic decision to appear weaker than we are. On the tactical display beside him, Wilson could see the Shadow Fleet completing its encirclement of the hegemony forces. 2,375 warships, ranging from rapid attack frigates to massive dreadnoughts, all equipped with humanity's actual level of technology, not the watered-down version they showed to the galaxy. A deception. Crathel clicked mandibles, now moving in what seemed like growing anger. A trap, exactly, Wilson confirmed, though I prefer to think of it as a necessary precaution. Humanity has a long history of being underestimated, Admiral. It rarely ends well for those who make that mistake. He gestured to someone off-screen, and the tactical feed was shared with the hegemony vessel. Wilson watched with satisfaction as Crathel's compound eyes took in the complete tactical situation. His fleet utterly overwhelmed, with targeting locked from multiple human vessels on each of his ships. Now then, Wilson continued, his tone shifting from conversational to commanding. Let's discuss your surrender, Admiral. Admiral Crathel had never experienced anything like this in his 300 cycles of military service. Surrounded, outgunned, and completely outmaneuvered by a species his intelligence had classified as primitive. This is some kind of trick, he hissed to his tactical officer. Scan those ships. They must be holograms, or... I've completed multiple scan patterns, Admiral, Vexer replied, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. They're real. And their weapons? The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. Orders of magnitude more advanced than our own. On the view screen, the human admiral waited patiently, as if he had all the time in the world. And Crathel realized with mounting horror. He did. What are our options? He asked quietly. Commander Vexer's antennae drooped slightly. We are surrounded on all vectors, Admiral. Even if we could break through their line at one point, the rest of their fleet would cut us to pieces before we could escape. And their weapons, preliminary analysis suggests a single one of their larger vessels could potentially destroy 3 of ours in direct combat. I don't mean to rush you, Admiral Crathel. The human's voice came through the speakers again. But I do require your answer. Will you surrender your fleet, or shall we demonstrate our actual military capabilities more directly? Crathul's mandibles clicked rapidly as he considered his options. The hegemony had never surrendered to an inferior species. It would be unprecedented, humiliating. But they had never faced a situation like this before, never walked into such a perfectly executed trap. "If I don't?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The human's expression remained neutral. "Then we will open fire and destroy your fleet. We have targeted your engines and life support systems to minimize casualties. But make no mistake, we will defend our world with all necessary force." Crathul turned to look at his bridge crew. These were not just subordinates. They were the finest officers in the hegemony, veterans of millions of campaigns. And now they looked to him to make an impossible decision. "Lower our shields," he finally said, the words almost physically painful to pronounce. "Deactivate weapon systems. I surrender my fleet to Earth forces." The human admiral nodded once. "A wise decision, Admiral. Maintain your current position. Our boarding teams will arrive shortly to secure your vessels." Admiral Wilson out. As the transmission ended, the bridge of the inevitable dominance fell into stunned silence. "What happens now?" Lieutenant Dexmore finally asked, his voice small. Admiral Crathul stared at the tactical display, at the overwhelming human fleet surrounding his own. "Now," he clicked his mandibles softly, "now we learn what it means to underestimate humanity." Captain Reeves watched from the battered bridge of the Indomitable as the Shadow fleet boarding parties proceeded towards the hegemony vessels. Despite the damage to his ship and the losses they'd sustained in the defensive action, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at how completely the operation had unfolded. "Message from Admiral Wilson, sir," Reed announced. He says, and I quote, "Nice acting job, James. You had them completely fooled." Reeves grunted. "Tell him the damage to my ship feels a little too authentic for my taste, but I appreciate the compliment." As the crew worked to stabilize the Indomitable systems, Reeves reflected on the culmination of decades of planning. Protocol Trojan Horse had been conceived almost 50 years ago, when humanity's deep space listening posts first detected the hegemony's communications and learned of their practice of conquering primitive species. Rather than announce their discovery to the galaxy, Earth's leaders had made the strategic decision to present two faces to the stars. A public one, seemingly vulnerable and technologically modest, and a shadow one, advanced and powerful beyond what any potential invader might expect. They had maintained the deception meticulously, building their real fleet in secret, developing technologies that leapfrogged conventional development paths, and preparing for the day when someone would inevitably come to conquer the apparently defenseless Earth. Boarding parties report hegemony crews are complying with surrender terms, Reed reported, breaking into Reeves' thoughts. "No resistance so far." "Good," Reeves nodded. "What's the status of our fleet?" Reed's expression sobered. 7 ships destroyed, sir. 11 with significant damage, including us. Casualty reports are still coming in, but it's going to be in the hundreds. Reeves closed his eyes briefly. They had known there would be losses, real losses, in the initial engagement. The deception had to be convincing, which meant that Earth's visible fleet had to fight as if they were humanity's truly last line of defense. The men and women aboard those ships had volunteered for what amounted to a suicide mission, knowing their sacrifice would help ensure humanity's survival. "Make sure their names are recorded properly," Reeves said quietly. "They died making history today." "Yes, sir." Reed hesitated, then added, "Admiral Wilson is requesting your presence at the formal surrender ceremony. A shuttle will dock with us in 20 minutes. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Formal surrender? That's unexpected." Apparently, the Admiral feels it's important for diplomatic reasons. The hegemony needs to understand exactly who they tried to conquer. Fair enough. Reeves straightened his uniform, grimacing at the burn mark on one sleeve. "I suppose I should look presentable for our first official alien diplomatic function." Reed grinned. "Just be yourself, sir. After all, you're the face that launched 1,000 ships, or rather, 2,375 of them." The formal surrender took place in the cavernous hangar bay of the EDF Reckoning, the flagship of humanity's Shadow Fleet. Admiral Crathul and his senior officers were escorted into the space by a human honor guard, their compound eyes taking in the vast chamber with unconcealed awe. The hangar had been transformed for the occasion. A long table sat in the center, with the human delegation already seated on one side. Admiral Wilson sat in the middle, flanked by Captain Reeves and various military and civilian officials. Behind them stood rows of officers and diplomatic representatives from Earth's nations. As Crathul approached the table, he couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between this vessel and the human ships his fleet had engaged earlier. Where those had been utilitarian and basic, this ship hummed with advanced technology. The very walls seemed alive with subtle energy patterns, and the artificial gravity was so perfectly calibrated that it felt entirely natural. Admiral Crathul, Wilson welcomed him with a formal nod. "Please be seated." The insectoid commander and his officers took their places opposite the human delegation. For a moment, there was silence as the two species regarded each other across the table. "Before we begin," Wilson said, "I believe introductions are in order. You know me, and this is Captain James Reeves of the UNS Indomitable, the ship your forces engaged." Crathul's mandibles clicked in recognition as he regarded Reeves. "Your vessel fought bravely, Captain, though I now understand it was a performance." Reeves tipped his head slightly. "Part performance, part necessity, Admiral. The ships you encountered were real, as were our casualties. A high price for deception. A necessary one," Wilson countered. "Now to business. The terms of your surrender are straightforward. Your fleet will be escorted out of the Sol system under our supervision. You will return to hegemony space and deliver a message from Earth to your leadership. And that message is?" Crathul asked, mandibles twitching slightly. Wilson leaned forward, his expression intense. "Earth is not to be trifled with. We are not the primitive species you believed us to be, and any further aggression against our world or our colonies will be met with overwhelming force." He paused, then continued in a slightly softer tone. "However, we are also open to establishing diplomatic relations with the hegemony on equal terms. We have no desire for conquest or expansion at your expense. We simply wish to be left in peace to develop our civilization our own way." Crathul seemed to consider this for a moment, his alien features difficult for the humans to read. "And my fleet, my crews, will be allowed to return home intact." "Confirmed, Wilson. We're not barbarians, Admiral. We don't take prisoners of war when alternatives exist, nor do we execute surrendered enemies. That said, we will be keeping one of your vessels for study. A fair exchange, I think, for your unprovoked attack on our world." The hegemony admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation, the human xenobiologist had explained. "The High Command will not be pleased with this outcome." "I imagine not," Wilson agreed. "But they might be interested in the alternative." He nodded to an aide, who activated a holographic display above the table. It showed a simulation of what would have happened had the battle continued: the systematic destruction of the hegemony fleet by Earth's superior forces. "We could have annihilated your entire fleet," Wilson said matter-of-factly. "Instead, we're allowing you to return home with valuable intelligence about a species the hegemony clearly underestimated. I call that a diplomatic gesture." Crathul's compound eyes fixed on the simulation, watching as virtual versions of his ships exploded one after another under the human onslaught. After a long moment, he looked back at Wilson. "I will deliver your message," he said finally. "But I cannot guarantee how the High Command will respond." Wilson smiled thinly. "We're counting on your eloquence, Admiral. Make them understand what happened here today, and what will happen if they try again." 3 months later, Captain Reeves stood in the observation lounge of the newly repaired UNS Indomitable, watching as the first official diplomatic delegation from the galactic hegemony approached Earth. Unlike the invasion fleet, this was a single vessel, sleek, obviously designed for speed rather than war, and broadcasting peaceful intentions on all frequencies. "Nervous?" asked Reed, coming to stand beside his captain. Reeves shook his head. Curious, more than anything. I wonder if they'll send our friend, Krathel. Not likely, Reed replied with a small smile. Word is he's been reassigned to some backwater outpost on the edge of hegemony space. Apparently, surrendering to a primitive species isn't great for one's career prospects, even when the alternative was total destruction. Especially then, I'd imagine. Pride is a funny thing, even among aliens. They watched in companionable silence as the diplomatic vessel was escorted into orbit by a small contingency of Shadow Fleet ships, no longer hiding their abilities, but not flaunting them either. A delicate balance of power and restraint. You know, Reeve said thoughtfully, in all of human history, I can't think of a first contact scenario that went quite like this. Reed groaned. What? You mean where aliens try to conquer us? And we revealed we were actually far more advanced than we appeared, turning the tables completely and forcing them to come back hand in hand for proper diplomacy. Exactly that. Reeve smiled as the alien ship settled into orbit, its elegant form silhouetted against Earth's blue backdrop. That we have, Commander. That we have. In the grand scheme of the galaxy, humanity was still a young species, taking its first tentative steps into the cosmic community. But as the events of the past months had shown, they were not to be underestimated. They had faced their first interstellar threat not with panic or desperation, but with careful planning, strategic foresight, and just a touch of theatrical flair. And if the galactic hegemony, or any other spacefaring power, ever forgot that lesson, humanity's real fleet would be there to remind them. Because if there was one thing that had become abundantly clear to the wider galaxy, it was this. Humanity endures.